So hi, I'm Zoe. I'm the Managing Director at Brights. I have been successfully working with our clients, as I said, for a number of years. And we're really excited to now be running these bootcamp sessions to share some of the learnings that we've acquired over the time that we've been working in this space. We're really passionate about what we do, so please feel free to ask questions as we go. There's a Q&A function on the side. We'll try and answer them. Otherwise, there'll be time at the end. As I said, it is an interactive session, so we'll be asking for hands up, using polls, and there's a quiz at the end to test your knowledge. And for those that do complete the session, there's a game plan that we'll be sharing with you, which gives you a one-page guide that you can use to get going on sprint leadership. So that's the warm-up done. So over to Sian, who is our other Agile coach, to introduce herself and talk about the key principles of sprint leadership.
Yes, lovely to see you all this morning. I'm Sian, I'm a director and agile lead at Bright. So I've been with the company for 4 years now. And a lot of my work over the last couple of years has been helping organizations to transform their marketing function, embed agile ways, agile ways of working in the agile methodology. So really excited to be sharing some of our experiences and top tips for how to use sprints within your business. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, there's three key areas really. So one is we're going to really cover a little bit about what it is that we mean when we talk about sprints. What do they involve? And also, given the current climate and everyone working from home and remotely, how do you run a successful sprint virtually? So those are the three key things that we'll be covering today. And just to reiterate, as Zoe said, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat bar or in the question function, and we can pick those up at the end of the session. So before we get started, I'm going to launch a poll very quickly and give you 10-15 seconds to answer, but really keen to understand if you're using sprints already in your marketing. So quick poll, 10-15 seconds, and then we can talk about the results. Okay, it looks like I can see everyone has now submitted their answers. Okay, it's a real interesting mix there. Sorry, just for you guys. So we've got about an even mix of people that are attendees that are using it across all of their projects, some that are using it across a few of their projects, and another third that are really looking at, not yet, but are looking to start implementing that within their business. So that's very exciting. So as there's a bit of a mix, we'll make sure that we cover, a little, all the bases in terms of what some of the key stages are within the sprints, as well as some of those top tips and tricks that for those of you that are already using agile within your business will hopefully help you do them much more successfully. So when we talk about, I guess before we get, let's start with the basics and really kind of break down what we mean when we talk about sprints versus things like projects and campaigns. So I think the first, as Zoe sort of mentioned as well in the intro and at the very beginning, when we talk about projects and campaigns, they're typically longer, they're more medium to long term type projects. So they will have KPIs and they will have business goals set to them, but generally speaking, it's focused over a much longer period of time than what you'd expect to be working through with sprints. And it's very much looking at the whole business. It's if we're talking certainly if we're talking larger organizations that might be slightly more traditional in their setup, then senior stakeholder sponsors, lots of different people within the business and within different divisions working and supporting towards that specific project or campaign. Whereas with sprints, whilst there is an overarching goal and they should be feeding into your longer term strategies. It's really looking at how you break down those longer term goals into bite-sized periods of time, sprints, goals and objectives that will lead to that higher overarching business goal, essentially. So using sprints means that you can be much more adaptable in terms of how your marketing is performing, the direction of travel that you need to be taking moving forward. And it's really focused around cross-functional teams, really building out collaboration, getting lots of different members of the organization together, working as a team so that they can focus on the tasks, the tasks and the deliverables that they need to prioritize in order to help achieve those business goals. So when we talk about a sprint, these are really the key phases that we talk about, and over the next sort of 10 minutes or so we'll be really talking about each of these different phases in a little more detail. But at the beginning of every sprint, you're looking to really identify and set those KPIs and those metrics and really define what it is that from at a project level, what it is that you're looking to achieve. From that, you can then start to actually plan what your sprints are going to look like, and that's where we'll talk a bit more about how that works. That's really where you start to build out what your plan and backlog of activity is going to be. You then move into actually running your sprint, and for this we'll be talking about stand-ups, which is really the mechanism for how you can keep track, keep checking in with your team to see how your sprint is performing. And at the end, we run a review and a retro. So at a very high level, those are the key stages for each area of the sprint that we'll talk about a bit more now. So how to smash your sprints. So at the start, as I mentioned, it's really all about your sprint planning. And the first thing that you've got to do is define your project goals, KPIs, and then the timeline and plan for how you're going to deliver it. So, at this stage, it's really important to make sure that you're thinking about the data, looking, if we're talking about a campaign, for example, then it might be looking at how previous campaigns have performed, so that you're bringing some insights and you're using some of the data that you have at your disposal to really work out what it is that your project needs to achieve, the KPIs and then the metrics that you need to use in order to measure how successful that sprint is performing. It's then the next part of the sprint planning process is really focusing on, making sure that you're creating a really clear structure and direction for what needs to take place in each sprint. So typically speaking, you're going to, whether it's your internal team, whether you're working with suppliers, a combination of the two, you're going to have a team of members that are going to be supporting you on delivering this project, whether it's a campaign, proposition development, whatever it might be. And one of the key things that the sprint planning process lets you do is provide that clear structure and make sure that everyone on the team really knows what it is that they're trying to achieve, what it is that they're working towards, and what it is that they need to do in order to be able to deliver on that. And then as part of that process, it's really working with the team as a whole to agree what those tasks look like, and then who's going to take ownership of those. One of the great things with agile ways of working is, from a team perspective, it builds up their confidence. It gives them ownership and responsibility over certain tasks. So as part of that sprint planning process, it's really important to make sure that you've got all of the team together. You're communicating what it is that you're trying to achieve, how that breaks down in terms of your activity. And a sprint could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks. I've run sprints that are 4 weeks. So they can run at different periods of time, but it's making sure that everyone's clear about what they've got to achieve within that time frame, and then giving people the opportunity to take some ownership over some of those tasks and being able to deliver them over the course of that sprint. So some critical success factors that you should be thinking about in your sprint planning process is be realistic. the worst thing that you can do is try and overload yourself with too many things that you need to try and achieve within a 3-week time frame, for example. So it's really key that you're realistic in terms of what it is that you and your team are able to deliver. Otherwise it can be quite demoralizing if by the end of the sprint you look back at what you've been able to achieve and it's not quite as much as what you'd set out to do. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're really thinking about your capacity, the skill sets within the team, etc., so that you're really thinking about what it is that you can deliver. The next critical success structure is really around setting clear, measurable goals. So, in marketing we talk about SMART objectives. That's really essentially what we're talking about here, making sure that the objectives for your sprint are SMART, and that you're also defining what the metrics and what good looks like, so that when you're starting to measure your performance, you've got a baseline and you've got a benchmark that you can compare yourself towards, so that you can then look at how you might need to optimize or improve as you head into future sprints. And then, as I mentioned, so I won't talk too much more about this one, but set clear tasks and ownership. So make sure that everyone is very clear on what it is that they've got to do, what it is that they've got to deliver, and when they've got to deliver it by. And then proactively identify risks and issues. So when we talk about sprint management, identifying risks and issues should be happening across the course of a sprint. But as part of the sprint planning process, what I found in the past is that it's actually a really good time to also just sit there and think about what risks might potentially come up over the next 3-4 weeks, whatever your timeframes are, that could have an impact on your delivery, whether that's holidays, whether that there's another big project within the business that's going live. All of those things are really good to discuss and make sure that you're aware of, so that you can start to think about in this planning process what it is that you can do to minimize the impact, mitigate some of those risks, so that you're in a good stead as you start to move into sprint delivery. And then the other thing, and again, I think this is really important, but agile ways of working, people are taking ownership, they want to learn more. A lot of the time, in my experience, people are very keen to be taking more responsibility. So it's also really important, certainly at a leadership level, that you're supporting that within your team, and you're making sure that there's training, learning, whatever it might be, to be able to support them in order to be able to do some of those tasks. So certainly at a leadership level, it's really key to make sure that you're giving people the opportunity and providing support for them to learn, build their skill set, so that they can take on more responsibility and more of that delivery side of things. And then I'll pass back now to Zoe, who's going to talk a bit more about what happens when we start to deliver a sprint.
Yes, so stand-ups I'm going to focus on in particular. So the stand-up is a regular short meeting. Typically you would stand up. Obviously now with everyone working virtually, then you can stand or sit however you may wish, but the idea is that it's a short, sharp session with the core team. So that would probably involve marketers, sales leads, subject matter experts, and the project manager or scrum master. You can explore the status of the project or the campaign as a group, so you can understand not only progress but also identify those barriers to success. The frequency of a stand-up is something that we flex depending on what is required at that point in a project life cycle. So you may need a higher frequency of stand-up during an intense time, such as building up to a major virtual event or a proposition launch. So that's really up to you to tailor to your organization, but we certainly would say no less than twice a week for the stand-ups to perform effectively. So as you can see, 3 areas that we would focus on. So what did we accomplish prior to the last stand-up? Since the last stand-up, and what will we need to do next before the next stand-up, and what issues or barriers are there to our progress? And there's some do's and don'ts that we try and follow when we're running stand-ups, and do put a clock on it. Stand-up should be short and time bound. If they start to drift, then they become much less productive. Do keep it question driven. Try and remain standing, and be visual. So as we've all moved into a virtual environment, this obviously has been an area that we've had to focus on thinking a bit harder about. So we use a number of project management tools with clients, and that can range from things like Monday.com, Trello, even a spreadsheet to allow you to keep your backlog moving and monitored. And be inclusive, make sure everyone who needs to participate does, and be honest and proactive. Raise concerns before they become issues, so that you can capture all those risks, as Sian said, as you go. And that's very important. You know, actually, if you can nip some of those things in the bud early on, or before they become more significant, then the impact will be much less on your ability to meet your sprint KPIs. Don't, for stand-ups, don't try problem solve in a stand-up. You often only have 15 minutes, and it's really, really easy to get into solutionizing when you do have issues at hand. But you need to basically arrange for follow-up sessions on the ones that you can't rapidly resolve, and make sure that they don't take over that stand-up. Don't use the meeting to plan the whole sprint. That should have been done at the get-go, as Sian mentioned, in sprint planning. If you need to course correct and change your plans, then again, you may well need to set a separate session and make sure you've got the right stakeholders in. Don't blame. There's always issues in any business environment. There's never plain sailing, or very rarely. So I'd be very surprised if you didn't come across a few barriers as you roll. That said, you know, working collaboratively as a team to solve them, this is your opportunity, so don't blame people or functions or organisation, parts of the organisation. And try not to involve too many stakeholders. Quite tempting, particularly when people are starting to use stand-ups, to try and invite everybody that may or may not have a significant involvement in this programme of work or project. It can make it very difficult to manage large stand-ups. It is possible, but it really should be the core team that's actually working on the actionable deliverables at that point in the sprint, as part of the project cycle. And as I've mentioned, and you can see here, it's very important to identify these risks and issues, to document those actions, and to set deadlines so everyone's clear on who's doing what and when. And we've got another poll coming up for you now. So we just wanted to find out, when do you review the results of a campaign? So we just give you a few moments to press the button.
Give you a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll there, and we can touch on the results of this poll at the end of the session.
Great, thanks, Sian.
Great. So sprint reviews. So you've done the hard part. You know, your sprint is nearly over. You're kind of heading into the last last few days of that sprint, and this is where you should really start to be thinking about setting and arranging your sprint reviews. So the purpose of a sprint review is to bring everyone together and to talk about the highlights and key learnings from the sprint. So this is an opportunity to get everyone together so that they can talk about what they achieved, what worked well, what didn't, and really showcase some of the work that they were able to do. It's also a really good opportunity to get some feedback from some of the key stakeholders. So certainly at a leadership level, to understand how the sprint is performing for certain areas of the business, whether there's any internal ways of working that aren't quite right. This is a really good time to really get that feedback and start to think about what needs to be done in the sprints moving forward. And that could be ways of working, as well as tactics, deliverables, things that you need to think about moving forward into the next sprint in order to help you achieve your goals. So the sprint review is where you get to highlight your successes, And I think the key thing that here is to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to say something, no matter how small. Everyone should get a chance to be able to highlight some successes or some key learnings that they've identified from the sprint. You would then move quite quickly into what we call the sprint retro. So the sprint retro is really all about reflection. It's looking at some of those key learnings, identifying what hasn't worked quite so well, why that might be the case, so that you can really start to think about what you need to do differently as you head into your next sprint. So this should be, again, very collaborative, very interactive. It should be a discussion where everyone gets a chance to input some ideas and talk about what they could do to implement some of the key learnings moving forward. And you can then feed this into an action plan that you can start to add to as part of your next sprint planning process. So again, I think Zoe touched on this when we were talking about the stand-ups, but with the reviews and the retros, they are open forums. It's not about naming and shaming. It's really about making sure that everyone can be upfront, honest, and transparent about what worked and what didn't. We want our team to be able to highlight potential failings where things didn't work, because that's how we improve, and that's how we optimize our activity. So it's really important to make sure that it's not a blame game. It's people coming together to be really frank and honest about what happened in that sprint and what they can do moving forward to make sure that they improve from there.
Thanks,
So back to Zoe, who's going to talk about running sprints virtually.
Yeah, and I did briefly touch on this in the stand-ups, but obviously there's been some shift, and we've learned some things about running sprints virtually. Tools and tech, there are lots of great tools out there. I'm sure many of you are already using them to help your teams collaborate, from things like Slack and Teams through to virtual project management tools, team building and brainstorming tools such as Mural. So really making the best use you can of tools and tech to bring people together in a collaborative way. It gives you obviously a greater ability to run those stand-ups, reviews and retros effectively. And then communication. So obviously it's really important to communicate effectively now that we're all working virtually. It's very easy for things to get misunderstood or misconstrued. So be authentic and open, encourage ideas and feedback. And do encourage everyone to participate. It's quite easy for people to blend into the background in a virtual environment, but also if those people are less confident about normally kind of speaking up, perhaps there's an opportunity for them to use these virtual channels to actually say their piece. It's also a great way of making sure you've got regular communications within your businesses to demonstrate the results that your marketing projects and programs are delivering. So it's not just about communicating within your sprint teams, but it also communicating the successes or learnings from the programs that you're delivering to the wider business and beyond. And cadence, so as we've already discussed with stand-ups, you need to make sure you have a reasonable level of cadence, so regular brief stand-ups, but also those other types of meetings that you will have as part of the sprint cycle. So retros and reviews, for instance, we run them virtually using Mural to help with virtual post-it noting, but also we make sure that we actually combine them. So 30 minutes is the sprint review, a chance to kind of share success and learnings, as Sian mentioned, and then the 30 minutes retrospective, which is more about areas that need some improvement or further investigation to make sure they perform better or are replaced going forward to the next sprint. And then the final virtual tip, be prepared. So it's better to set clear agendas and have a standing agenda for stand-ups so that everyone's clear on what they need to focus on, or things can drift very easily. And if you're going to call a virtual meeting, bringing together key stakeholders from the sprint team, then make sure you've got a clear outcome you're looking to achieve, which is very common sense, but sometimes can be overlooked. And those are the virtual tips, but now back to Sian for the pop quiz.
Yes, so we've got a little pop quiz for you just to see what you've learned. So I guess the first one is, and please use your chat function to submit your answers. But this is a fill in the blank. So we talked at the beginning about 4 stages of a sprint cycle. So what are the 2 that are missing? And whilst you're starting to write your answers for that, I'll show our second pop quiz, which is, what's the main objective of a sprint review? And then the final one is actually more just of something for you to pop in your thoughts around in terms of what are the barriers that you face to adopting sprints in your organisation.
I think that the Charlotte, I think the answers have popped up for the 2 second and third questions, so that people can choose A, B, C.
Apologies. There we go. Oh, and
you just pop your answers into the chat panel.
Yeah.
It'd be great to see what people think they've learned. And obviously, as we mentioned, we'll be sharing the sprint cycle game plan after this this bootcamp session to those of you that have joined us. Has anyone got any questions they would like to share that they'd like us to pick up on? Any points that you'd like clarified? I guess everyone's really hungry and ready to go for their lunch.
It's lunchtime.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us today on this bootcamp. We do have a bootcamp running almost every week now through to the end of the year. So next week we will be looking at transformative communications, which is really interesting because it's talking about the cultural side of agile marketing and embedding new ways of working. So please do sign up or recommend it to your colleagues, and we'd be delighted to hear any feedback you have on this session. So do share your thoughts with us. And we'll be, as we said, we'll send out the sprint cycle game plan, and look forward to seeing you at the next session.